does a best-in-class customer or consumer experience look and feel like? You generally know that you're experiencing one because you're going to feel like you are the absolute center of that organization or that company's universe. Maybe not their only customer, that would be a different problem, but feeling like one of the most important customers that they have. And if we were to look at that a little bit closer and break it down into its components, what does it actually mean to be having a best-in-class customer experience? What would that feel like for you? Looking at it in its pieces, it would be one where you're met in ways that you prefer. So whatever channel that you want, flexibly being engaged and being engaged consistently across those channels. You would be met in a way that matters most to you. So being delighted with those unasked for responses to needs that you might have, those known needs as well as the unknown needs, meeting those unmet demands, right? You'd be met in ways that honor your preferences. So frequently enough that the engagement is impactful, but not so often enough that it becomes bothersome. And most importantly for this one, in ways that honor the permissions and preferences that you've expressed back to the organization. And finally, that best-in-class customer experience would be one where you're met with value that is reflective of the history that you have had with the organization, the things that you know the organization should know about you from the engagement that you've had with them, that would enable them to deliver some kind of value to you, be it offers, connection, a community of some kind, whatever that is, a reflection of what they know about you as the customer. I've put a couple logos of organizations that have helped set the bar for what I feel personally are best-in-class customer consumer experiences. What's going to be common for everybody in this room is that your expectations for what great or what best-in-class can look like with a customer experience is going to be materially different today than it was 1, 2, 5, 10 years ago. Just as your expectations for what great or best-in-class can look and feel like for a customer experience have heightened and have evolved over time, the expectations of your customers, the customers of each of your organizations, have evolved and heightened as well. But here's the kicker. Regardless of whether or not you are a B2B or a B2C organization, the expectations of your customers are shaped by not just one, but a collection of experiences from many brands that are usually B2C or direct-to-consumer type of experiences. And fair or not, that is going to be true regardless of, again, B2B or B2C, the size and scale of your organization, the geographies in which you operate, and whether or not you call your customers buyers, patients, members, students, constituents, you name it. Where did these heightened expectations come from? So it's been an evolution. We all didn't just wake up yesterday and decide that we have these new crazy expectations that are materially different from, the world of yesterday. It happened over time. And best-in-class marketing organizations have been building on each other, iteratively setting the bar over and over again for what best-in-class can actually be or can actually mean for you as an end consumer or the customers of your organization. And creating these experiences no longer require the type of resources that were once only available to the Fortune 500 or Fortune 100, to those global brands, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis, the Home Depots of the world. There are things that have happened that have actually made these capabilities or creating these experiences that were once out of reach for just about everybody, really within reach for all. Things like the prevalence of cloud and subscription-based technologies, new data and new ways to access and use that data, and new ways of working. Why isn't every organization, every brand or company churning out on a regular basis their own greatest hits of customer experiences? What we believe is that there's actually 5 barriers that exist that are preventing most organizations from doing exactly that. The first being culture and beliefs. The second, disconnected and inconsistent data. The third, underutilized technology. The fourth, archaic business processes and organizational silos. And finally, everybody's favorite, measurement and accountability. We also believe is that as leaders, either in marketing or technology or other commercial functions with their or within your organization, if you can understand these barriers as instead opportunities, that you can help your organizations transition from being reactive and trying to keep pace with the trends to instead actually setting pace for what the expectations of your customers might actually have for what great can be in terms of experience. The first barrier that we'll talk about is culture and beliefs. And this is actually identified by a recent Forrester survey as the #1 barrier to creating amazing customer experiences. As we look at the barrier of culture or around culture and beliefs that exists at a lot of organizations, I want to first take a look at B2B organizations in particular. There are two trends that make those tactics not just successful, but almost mandatory if you want to be successful in the B2B space. Again, regardless of what you're selling. The first of those trends is the consumerism of the enterprise buyer. The second trend we won't dive into too much, but it's important to recognize is that there's been an ever more disparate landscape in terms of the decision makers across large enterprises. So increasing distribution in the way and the wheres that decisions are made in terms of enterprise purchases. But recognizing these trends and the need for these B2C tactics, really what you're seeing is the best B2C organizations have a hyper focus on the buyer journey, and they're able to use the data, the technologies around them to understand where they can best meet the buyer in their journey to influence their behaviors. Most B2B companies, at least from my experience, are very sales focused. And the success of their organization has been built on a history of direct relationships with the C-suite. As a result of that, you have a culture where individual efforts and heroics are rewarded, and you start to have this lone wolf mentality. The trickle-down impacts of all of that is you likely have a culture, a set of beliefs within those organizations where you hear things that are said like, it's my customer, not this is the customer of my organization. You can also have that type of belief set where marketing is looked at as that function that sends emails to a list of known contacts, instead of a belief where marketing is our partner in growth and they drive top of funnel demand. At those same organizations, you're probably going to have the beliefs or cultural barriers that prevent marketing and sales from working well together. You have little trust and almost no collaboration versus what you need to really execute and use these B2C tactics well. And that's an organization where the lines between sales and marketing are so blurred that it's hard to understand where one function stops and the other one starts. And instead you have just a go-to-market enabling team. So the call to action that I have here, if you're in a B2B organization and any of those comments resonate with you, the time to invest in shifting the culture and the beliefs within your organization is right now. And it's very worthwhile to do that at this time before investing too heavily in your digital marketing and customer experience capabilities. Investing in shifting the culture and beliefs now will greatly reduce the roadblocks or barriers that you might be experiencing down the road otherwise. Still talking about culture and beliefs, but looking a bit broader to B2B. And I know on the slide we call it out as just B2C, but this is really one that's impactful to any organization of any shape and size. So regardless of which company you go to, every business function that exists is going to have an impact on the customer's experience in some way. It may not always be direct, but it is indirectly going to have an impact on that customer experience. And it's unreasonable to think that you could have one leader that would own all of that. Right? And even if you have the benefit of a CEO or a C-suite, or even at a board level where there's just truly a customer-centric mentality, you're always going to have a bit of that disconnect because every function touches the customer. And what we see is a pretty complex landscape of all these different areas that can have impact on that customer's experience that are often disconnected. And with the limited cross-functional collaboration that you often see without that shared understanding of the customer or the buyer's journey, and not saying that each of these functions might not be appreciating the buyer or the customer's journey, but what we see is they're often looking at a different picture of the journey. So not collaborating with that same understanding of what the journey actually is. They're not harmonizing or coordinating their impacts to the customer and creating challenges like inconsistencies or breaking some of those other call them symptoms of a best-in-class experience. You're not aware of how frequently you're actually interacting with the customer because everybody's doing things differently or on their own terms. The call to action here is whether you're a marketing leader or technology or another commercial function, bringing together this disconnected landscape around that shared view of the customer in the spirit of creating just a better customer experience overall is the value that you ultimately must bring to your organization. There's no easy way to do that, but at least recognizing this is a barrier is a great way to get started. The next barrier or opportunity is in the area of data. So success in creating a great customer experience requires a common, central, shared view of the customer. And that includes a history of every interaction the organization has had, the preferences of the customer, and anything else that you should be or could be learning about them. That's non-negotiable. You might be able to get by right now, but in the future, your ability to create a great experience and scale to keep doing new things will be greatly limited if you do not have that in place. Might be scary, but the good news is the data that you actually need to create this shared view of the customer already exists at, I can say confidently, every one of your organizations. But companies that don't take the next step, and that's actually aligning it, they'll find themselves in an area where that data might be inconsistent in definition or even timing. It's going to be disconnected, and as a result, we see it being largely underutilized. So again, it might seem obvious that yes, you need that single view of the customer, that one place, that hub of understanding of your history, of your relationship with that customer, but we see a lot of companies actually skipping that step. And instead what they're doing is trying to drive engagement from disparate operational or transactional databases. If you do this, not only are you able to better orchestrate your engagement or that experience with the customer in a more consistent manner, you're also going to be able to better answer some pretty important questions, such as which segment should we target? What's most valuable, right? What is our lifetime value of the customer? What is our target in those areas? So call to action, connect and centralize your customer data and create that complete view of behaviors, interactions, and preferences. Connect and centralize it on a platform or a solution that's flexible to the needs of being able to keep learning about the customer over time. And if you do that, you're going to have that complete view to allow you to orchestrate in a more coordinated and, dare I say, holistic manner. The barrier that we see is that technology in this space, and we'll refer to it as marketing technology and advertising technology, because those are typically the classifications of the tools that you would use to drive engagement at scale. The challenge that we see is those tools are often underutilized. And if we start to push into the why those tools might be underutilized, we come back to really two potential answers to that, right? Our hypothesis. The first is that we see a lot of these investments being made in silos. So without engaging the right stakeholders to really understand what does it take to operate the capabilities that these tools would enable, and what are the upstream and downstream implications of actually using the tools to drive this engagement or connect in these new ways. The second reason we tried to illustrate up here on the image behind me above the very confused caricature of a gentleman here. And this graphic, it's not possible to be seen in all of its detail if you blew it up 100 times for this. It's aptly titled MarTech 5000. And I say aptly titled because when this was actually put together in 2017, it was a collection of, as best the authors could come up with, every logo from each of the tools and companies that had solutions out in the market at that time to drive customer engagement in that marketing and advertising technology space. And that was 2017. And growth in technologies in this area have not slowed down since then. The landscape's going to continue to get confusing and crowded, and these tools aren't all unique. A lot of them have a lot of overlaps, even when you're looking within one logo of those companies. So how do we make sense of that? found that it's actually most helpful to think about all of those tools instead as the capabilities that they might prop up, and to classify them across a series of layers comprising what we in the biz would call your marketing technology stack, or your MarTech stack. I'll hit on each of those layers pretty quickly here. So the first, if we're starting at the bottom, is your foundational layer. So this is really the groundwork or the infrastructure that you need to tie everything together. It's going to be your databases, your servers, your integration tools, and also your CRM, that everything else is going to kind of sit on top of, if we can speak figuratively. The next layer is your operations layer. So this is a layer that doesn't really catch the attention of the customer, and that's okay. These are the tools that are going to be used to manage your marketing resources, or customer experience resources, your production workflows, as well as your optimization and testing for your outbound communications and offers. The third layer is your middleware layer. And it's your layer that you're going to be using to ingest everything that you're learning about customers through these interactions and their behaviors as they interact with your brand and your technologies. And it's also going to be where you're mastering that information, so that if I'm one system talking to another, when I say Tim and that system says Tim, we're talking about the same Tim and not that other guy, right? And we're going to be deriving your segments that you can use for some of those more advanced capabilities like targeting or retargeting. The next layer, the platform layer, and that's where your marketing automation tools as well as your campaign management. And then finally, the experience layer. This is what's front and center to the customer. And it's everything from the web UI that they would interact with when they go to your website. It could be the mobile application. It could even be the point of sale solution that's used to facilitate the transaction that customer might have in a brick and mortar location. So the question that you should be asking is, what should my marketing technology stack look like? Do I need all of this? The answer is probably not, to the second part of that question. And the first part of the question, what should my stack look like? Well, the mature stack is going to be different based on the needs of each of your organizations. What will be the same for everybody in this room, so regardless of your organization, are a few things. One, everybody, if you want to be able to have a solution that's going to scale for great customer engagement now as well as into the future, we'll need to first get the foundational elements in place. But if you start with that foundational layer here, you need to have CRM, you need to have a master data management solution. So, when you're saying Tim and I'm saying Tim, we're saying the same Tim, right? And you need to have the infrastructure to share that data in hopefully a real-time way. There are three things after you have your foundation that every company must have if you want to drive great customer experience at scale. You must have a web analytics solution. You must have a content management or web content management solution. And you must have a marketing automation platform. Start there. And that's going to give you the benefit of focus as you try to figure out, do we have the pieces in place to build for the future? After you've done that, and the answer is yes, you can start thinking strategically and building incrementally over time. Introducing new technologies, other snippets from that MarTech 5000 picture, to try to see, really what's going to work with our within our organization and across our customer base. Fourth out of the five barriers: archaic operating models and organizational silos. So we know customer expectations have changed, the technology's changed, and so has the data. The way we work, however, really focusing on marketing here, has not changed that much. So if I were to go back in time 15 years and grab 4 people from a marketing department at any one company, bring them forward into the future at the same company, there'd be some stuff that changed. You spent a lot more time on your phone. The internet's everywhere, like really everywhere, and social media happened, right? What hasn't changed though, the titles, the way that marketers organize their tasks and go about their work really has not changed that much. Campaigns are still very large and rolled out infrequently, and the same agencies are relied on for the same services. What we're seeing is a trend that a lot of organizations, for various reasons, things like production fraud, media kickbacks, lack of transparency, or just the risk that comes along with not owning your data, are moving from a fully outsourced agency support model to an in-house model. And different blends of that exist. Netflix, in 2018, their marketing budget was just over $2 billion. 100% of that spend was with their in-house agency. None of it was outsourced. And USAA, I'll pick out of this group here, great example of how they're outperforming their peers using an external agency. So using the metric of return on ad spend, USAA spends just over 0.85% of revenue on advertising. They're outperforming their competitors who are spending 2.5% or greater of revenue on advertising. It's actually 3 steps that they're taking. And I'm really recommending taking a simple approach to this too. The first, rationalize what you have and think strategically. Take a step back and come up with your future state vision by answering the question of what is so core to our business, what is so core to our experience and our brand that we know that we are going to be doing this for the foreseeable future. Those should be the things that you have supported by your in-house roster. Everything else can be looked at as consideration for external support, but retooling it with prioritization on things like speed to market, transparency, or data ownership, whatever is most important for your organization. The next step, this is where it gets really tricky. Get started, seriously. So one thing that I've seen as like very, very common across the majority of the clients I'm working with is they're relying on external agencies for creative, social, and SEM. Those 3 things are not going away. And you likely have people on your roster already that would be really excited to take on this work. And then the final step is to build incrementally, just as we talked about with the technology piece. So take a minute to measure and learn and make sure what you're doing is actually working before going too much further down the path. Recognize that marketing is traditionally not very well integrated in the processes and planning cycles that are used to guide the rest of the organization. So the call to action here is to take a moment and, if you're a marketer, re-engage sales, IT, other commercial functions, or if you're in one of those functions, re-engage with marketing to re-engineer the processes and the decision points that you're using to guide the rest of your planning and the priorities for your organization, to include not just marketing, but to bring that customer back to the focus of the decisions that you're making. Final barrier that we'll touch on, or opportunity, is in the area of measurement and accountability. What we recommend is start with the objectives that the organization has and work back from there. The closest you can get, or closer you can get to those objectives, the more impactful your measurements as either a marketing leader or just a CX leader, customer experience leader overall, will be. I'll use the example of what typically happens in B2B organizations. You have marketing teams that are communicating things like email clicks, deliverability rates, website visits, impressions. Those are super important within the walls of marketing, and keep measuring those, because that's how you're going to tell if what you're doing is actually working or not within the walls of marketing. Outside of the walls of marketing, however, your stakeholders, other partners within the business, they understand those metrics, but they're just not going to care in terms of the ultimate results that you're all supposed to be working together to create. You can instead look at revenue. And it's hard to say, okay, what I'm doing is creating this amount of growth. But what I can say is, instead of a marketing qualified lead, number of marketing qualified leads created, maybe take a step farther and look at what's important to sales or partner function. And instead, on your dashboard you're using to communicate, have converted sales qualified leads. Or even better, look at the way that sales coaches their resources. So most well-tuned and well-tooled sales engines will be coaching their frontline salespeople to do different behaviors that'll drive organic growth. So if you as a marketer, instead of communicating marketing qualified leads, are instead communicating number of new introductions or meetings facilitated as a result of leads generated from marketing, that becomes a pretty powerful metric, and it will be very difficult for other parts of the organization to engage you as anything other than a partner in growth. So to wrap this up, I really do believe that we are at a tipping point right now, and the urgency for transformation in the area of marketing and customer experience has really never been higher. We're foolish if we don't anticipate a period of economic contraction in the future. It's happening to the rest of the world already. Eventually, it will creep into our borders. And if you take the head start or the opportunity that you have now to address some of these items, things that you don't want to have to be investing in when competition increases and resources become scarce during those periods of economic contraction, you'll be set up to not just survive during those times, but to come out of a recession or a downturn actually thriving.